Minimal territorial gains, maximum strategic costs. At first glance, the map appears dramatic. Russia currently occupies roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory, but context reshapes perception. The overwhelming majority of those territorial gains occurred either in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea or during the first year of the full-scale invasion launched in February 2022 under President Vladimir Putin. What has happened since tells a very different story. Between early 2023 and the end of 2025, Russian forces reportedly captured only an additional 1.4% of Ukrainian territory. That figure fundamentally alters the narrative of momentum. In 2023, territorial gains were estimated at just 0.1%. In 2024, they increased slightly to between 0.5 and 0.6%. In 2025, progress ranged between 0.7 and 0.8%. These numbers do not suggest rapid expansion, they suggest grinding attrition. Modern warfare is often measured not only in land seized, but in cost per kilometer advanced. By that metric, the campaign has become extraordinarily expensive. To secure that additional 1.4% over 3 years, Russian forces are estimated to have suffered approximately 112,000 casualties, killed or wounded. That translates to roughly 332 soldiers lost for every square mile gained during that period. Even in the context of high-intensity warfare, this ratio is staggering. Since February 2022, total Russian casualties are estimated to exceed 1.26 million personnel. While precise numbers remain contested in wartime reporting, the scale alone indicates one of the most severe military attrition rates seen in Europe since the mid-20th century. The strategic implication is clear: territorial acquisition has slowed dramatically, while human cost has accelerated. Attrition warfare favors the side with deeper reserves, industrial, demographic, and technological. Yet prolonged losses at this scale strain any system. Military mobilization draws from the civilian labor force. Casualties ripple through families, regional economies, and political stability. This raises a critical question: what constitutes victory? If territorial expansion is measured in fractions of a percentage point per year, while losses accumulate in the hundreds of thousands, the strategic calculus becomes increasingly difficult to justify. Historically, wars of attrition can erode not only armies but national capacity. Infrastructure destruction, sanctions pressure, and demographic contraction compound battlefield losses. Over time, the cumulative burden shifts from military strain to systemic strain. What began as a rapid invasion aiming at decisive outcomes has evolved into a prolonged struggle, defined by incremental advances and immense sacrifice. Maps can be misleading. 20% occupation sounds decisive. But when recent progress amounts to 1.4% over 3 years, the dynamic looks less like expansion and more like stagnation under extreme cost. This chapter establishes the foundation of the broader analysis. The war is no longer defined by sweeping offensives. It is defined by diminishing returns. And in prolonged conflicts, diminishing returns reshape strategic futures. The human catastrophe behind every percentage point of territory lies a human cost. Between 2023 and 2025, for an additional 1.4% of Ukrainian land, Russian forces are estimated to have suffered approximately 112,000 casualties, killed or wounded. That figure alone redefines the scale of the conflict. Since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022 under Vladimir Putin, total Russian casualties are believed to have surpassed 1.26 million personnel. Even allowing for the uncertainty that accompanies wartime reporting, the magnitude is extraordinary. To contextualize it, this represents one of the highest sustained casualty rates experienced by a major military power in modern European history. And these losses were incurred not during rapid territorial breakthroughs, but during incremental, grinding advances measured in tenths of a percent. The ratio is stark. Roughly 332 Russian soldiers lost for every square mile gained over the past 3 years. That is not maneuver warfare. It is attritional warfare at industrial scale. Attrition warfare is not only about battlefield deaths, it reshapes demographics. Russia already faced structural demographic challenges before 2022, an aging population, declining birth rates, and labor shortages in key sectors. Large-scale mobilization compounds these vulnerabilities. Every conscript drawn into the military reduces civilian labor capacity. Every casualty represents not just a battlefield statistic, but a long-term economic subtraction. Skilled technicians, engineers, mechanics, and young workers form the backbone of industrial productivity. Their absence creates cascading effects. Families absorb the shock. Regional economies absorb the shock. The state budget absorbs the shock. High casualty rates also influence morale. Prolonged campaigns with limited visible progress strain public perception. While centralized media control can shape narrative framing, casualty notifications and wounded veterans returning home cannot be entirely abstracted. Military sustainability depends not only on manpower numbers, but on replacement quality. Rapid mobilization cycles often reduce training time and experience levels. Over time, this can degrade operational effectiveness, creating a feedback loop. Lower training leads to higher casualties, which require further mobilization. The strategic gamble in such conflicts rests on endurance, the belief that one side can sustain losses longer than the other, but endurance has limits. As casualty numbers rise above 1 million, the war shifts from a military campaign to a generational event. A cohort of young men is removed from the demographic pyramid. This affects birth rates, workforce participation, and long-term economic growth projections. Wars end, but demographic scars persist for decades. The human cost, therefore, extends beyond the battlefield timeline. It becomes embedded in national capacity. If territorial gains remain marginal while human losses remain massive, the asymmetry becomes difficult to reconcile with strategic objectives. This chapter underscores a central reality. The war's map may change slowly, but the human toll accumulates rapidly. And over time, it is often the human factor, not the territorial one, that determines the true cost of conflict. The systematic destruction of military power territory can be regained. Military capacity is far harder to rebuild. Beyond the human toll, the war has inflicted staggering material losses on Russia's armed forces under President Vladimir Putin. Equipment attrition on this scale reshapes not only battlefield dynamics, but long-term military credibility. Since February 2022, Russian losses are estimated to include more than 11,700 tanks, 24,000 armored vehicles, 37,600 artillery systems, 430 aircraft. Even allowing for variation in independent assessments, the order of magnitude is extraordinary. Modern armored warfare depends heavily on logistics, maintenance cycles, and industrial replenishment. Tanks and armored vehicles are not simply numbers, they represent production capacity, supply chain stability, and technological depth. Replacing thousands of destroyed platforms requires time, raw materials, advanced components, and a functioning industrial base under sanctioned pressure. Artillery losses are particularly significant. The war in Ukraine has been defined by artillery dominance. Sustained firepower requires both systems and ammunition. When equipment losses compound ammunition shortages, operational tempo slows. Aircraft losses also carry strategic implications. Air superiority is central to modern combined arms warfare. While Russia retains significant air assets, repeated losses and increased vulnerability to advanced air defense systems reduce operational freedom. Another dimension is naval degradation. Reports indicate that roughly one-third of Russia's Black Sea fleet has been damaged or destroyed, largely due to Ukrainian drone and missile strikes. Naval losses are not easily reversible. Warships take years to design, construct, and commission. Losing a substantial portion of a regional fleet alters maritime posture and deterrence credibility. Beyond numbers lies technological erosion. Sanctions have restricted access to advanced semiconductors and specialized components required for modern weapon systems. Domestic substitution efforts exist, but advanced electronics production ecosystems cannot be replicated quickly. Over time, this technological bottleneck risks widening the gap between Russian capabilities and NATO standard systems. Military power is cumulative. It is built over decades through investment, research, training, and doctrine development. When large quantities of hardware are destroyed in a compressed time frame, rebuilding becomes exponentially more complex. Particularly under financial strain and international isolation, there is also a strategic messaging cost. Pre-war, Russia projected itself as a near-peer conventional military power capable of rapid, decisive operations. Prolonged equipment losses and visible battlefield setbacks alter global perception. Military credibility influences diplomatic leverage. When perceived strength declines, negotiating power often follows. Industrial mobilization can offset some attrition. Russia has increased defense production and shifted to a wartime economic footing. However, scaling production under sanction constraints and labor shortages introduces structural inefficiencies. This chapter highlights a fundamental reality. Wars of attrition do not only consume soldiers, they consume arsenals. And when equipment destruction reaches into the tens of thousands, the long-term consequence is not merely battlefield difficulty, it is systemic military degradation. The immediate conflict is measured in kilometers, but the strategic cost is measured in decades of rebuilding.